Hello and welcome, my ghouls and goblins, to the Halloween series on the Screen Queen. Hello there and welcome back to the Screen Queen. We're here. This is the place for the scares that care. So, a 6-hour Stephen King miniseries that is hailed as one of the best and also one of the most divided as well. When you look at Stephen King miniseries, there's like subcategories that some of these miniseries goes into, since the King of Horror has had a lot of interpretations in the decades. When you saw him in the 70s, you were kind of getting like the raw Stephen King, and then somewhere in the 90s it got schlocky, and then since then it's still kind of been a roller coaster. But all roads always lead back to The Stand. Now, I was too young to know what The Stand was because I wasn't even born yet. However, The Stand has had a way of getting through into different generations. I always caught this series on the Sci-Fi Network, usually every 6 months. It was kind of inescapable. And blessed be, they still had it in its entirely beautifully, bizarrely edited glory. Which means it was schlock on top of schlock, but it was a lot of good schlock. Thinking about how this series has aged is kind of a complicated feeling because I don't think it really left for a while. If I was able to catch this as a teenager in 2011 and 2012, that's a very strong following that happens from 94 till then. And now it's just kind of living in the catacombs of the internet, but it's never forgotten because it's Stephen King. But with this being a part of the time capsule of the 90s with other Stephen King miniseries, it's like its own subgenre of television. And since this does exist with his collaborations with Mick Garris, it has a different feel to it, and there's a lot that I've seen with having to make that revelation, and I am excited to get into it. So, M-O-O-N, this spells the Halloween series. This is The Stand. So I have to preface this with two things. This is just an opinion because I know The Stand has divided people over the years with how it's been interpreted and how people perceive it. I'm just one of the many and I'm just doing my thing. But I also have to say that I have not read the book, which I know is a sin I have committed. However, any book reader will tell you, you gotta clear your calendar if you're going to read The Stand. The joke about it being 5 Bibles long is literally the best joke, and a serious one at that. So the things that I'll be saying is based off of what I've seen from the series, and there will be some comparisons to the book from what I found out. So that's kind of how this episode's going to play out. So going back into the first episode of The Stand, I never realized how much of a slow burn it was, but one of the best kind of slow burns to have in terms of a virus story. I mean, it's a Rapture story, but for a solid virus intro, it's up there in my books. I like to think that we've been teased from all the sci-fi films and stories that do the idea of a virus, but it's usually just the world with a whole bunch of dots. This is like getting that in-depth look on what's going on with the dots. It's kind of the way I see it. After getting numerous Rapture and virus stories that just pretty much speed up the process of what happened to get here, it is a different take that you actually get to see how it got there. Having the opening of Don't Fear the Reaper while you see a whole bunch of infected people, that is one of the most majestic openings, but also, man, that thing works fast. Rapture wasn't messing around. But here's also the thing. I had to look into what they actually called it, and there is a commercial that says that this is called the Super Flu. They even have a hell of a commercial that made me think for a second, was that an advertisement coming in? And I'm like, oh, it's just the 90s. It was hilarious. Having to look back, having not seen The Stand in years, I never noticed like how much you like get out of everybody to get everything established, because 6 hours of this whole story, it's going to be a lot, but they don't mess around when it comes to this first introduction of who you're going to be around with. Especially some things that just needs to hold to have a cinematic value. And this is probably one of the reasons why The Stand is so loved, is not only is it great for television, but it had certain qualities to its presentation that made it feel more than just something you're seeing on TV. By all means, there are still some odd shots in here and some Stephen King, signature schlock shots, as I would call them, but there are some moments to really respect for how it was shot. Like, every time I see it, I'm like, really? This was just on TV? Like, everyone wasn't sleepwalking when they edited this. But I feel like the virus concept also invited how every option was exhausted before everyone was just like, all right, whatever's going on is going on. Not even able to figure out why the survivors were just miraculously not affected. Even though it had to do with the whole rapture going on still, the idea of wanting to understand a phenomenon and not being satisfied with the answers and not thinking this could just be a development that's beyond our own comprehension, and the feeling of this virus taking hold is probably done in ways that not many other virus stories would have done. But I still can't believe they call it the super flu. So one thing that I wrote down too in my notes to compare this is, it's like The Walking Dead. Like how when Rick Grimes wakes up and it's a whole new world where the dead are running the earth, essentially. I should say walking the earth, but you get my gist. And the way that Stu is automatically thrown into this new world where all he was doing was helping a family that he had no idea had been infected, and then the roots of how that infection goes. But it's like I said earlier about the dots, like you're seeing how something is taking hold and there's no stopping it, and this is just going to have to work its way to a dystopia. It's like I said, there's just a lot to admire from it, and I don't think I've taken the time to appreciate its beginning like I do its ending. But then there's the characters that we get into, and the woman, I just want to cite her, is Lynn Kressel. Lynn Kressel, if whatever she needs in life, I just want to personally thank her for making the most cast that's just basically everyone in the best way possible. There is never before or since something that is so 90s. I said in my last episode for Footloose that if you were to show someone what the 80s look like, this is what showing someone what the 90s looks like. All filled with everybody that was going around in the biggest year of 1994, as well as just every popular name you can think of that would just dive into this. It makes it kind of feel like the Marvel Cinematic Universe for celebrities, in a way. Everyone was chosen beautifully for their roles. I don't think there could have been any other way. I'm not even counting that remake, because that's a whole can of worms I'll get into later on, but I'm going to get to the good stuff right now. And that good stuff is the characters Stu, Franny, Nick, and Larry. We will be getting to all of the characters, but this is just a sampling for now, because there's so much to get into. We have to do this in spurts. And I'll admit, with their characters, having to look at them years later, I feel like they're honest heroes that happen to be like heroes. There are so many characters you get in the epidemic, pandemic, rapture stories that can seem holier than thou, and it's just kind of funny considering what we'll be talking about later. These characters don't come off so cliched, especially since this is coming from an author who tends to make very cliched characters, especially in the religious department. Seeing these characters feel a little bit more fleshed out, like it's like Stand By Me, stop by to say hello for a moment. Like, I think this is what gives The Stand a little bit more of an edge than Sleepwalkers and The Shining, is how these are a different group of Stephen King characters that has the same feeling of some of the other non-horror ones. And they're just a nice group to have to look at, remember once in a while. They don't get enough credit because there's so many different groups, but the Stan group, they don't get mentioned a whole lot. So starting with Stu, I mean, he's played by Gary Sinise. I mean, I'm just basically going to be knowing this guy is going to be our hero. Except Having to look at it again, I feel like Stu fits the fallible hero. No one exactly becomes a hero overnight. It's like, again, making reference to The Walking Dead, Glenn had to go around the edges, go through a rough mission, go through a tough time, and then you finally earn your credit. And being a hero in a virus film is not exactly a strive that everyone was looking for. When you're in a new world that is garnered by trying to keep morales in place with people that don't want morales, like that's a tough position to be in. And Stu wasn't exactly up there, but he's not exactly backing down from what has to be right. He doesn't acclimate like a sociopath, but he acclimates the way someone does. You just have to tread with caution. Like there's something to being a hero. You have to be afraid because it's what makes you fight. And seeing how he is combating an unknown world with a lot of logic, that kind of feels like a leader you want to believe in that's making good choices. Especially since he is Doctor to be, but they don't blow smoke up his ass. I just like how it's just a good hero in this. But then I thought about this. Stephen King has different eras, which makes all of his female characters be interpreted differently depending on what kind of Stephen King you were getting into. Was it the drugged up Stephen King? Was it the over-the-top Stephen King? Was it the post-car accident Stephen King? So the female characters go through different stages. But with Franny existing in the 90s era of Stephen King, right with the Mick Garris production of Sleepwalkers and The Shining, I think Franny's doing a way better job, and she's, no pun intended, stands out above the rest because she's not done over the top or being underwhelming. Looking at the other women that have been written, I think Franny got a much better deal than the other ones. Oh my goodness. But also, because she's not an underwhelming or overwhelming character, it does make the story breathe a little bit better because she's not having to go through a whole bunch of things. She still has her role that she plays being a part of the survivors and how they contribute together and work together. I mean, there are times that her character does go through really bizarre spurts because it's 90s Stephen King, so no one is exactly safe in their character, but having to watch the beginning of The Stand again and seeing her make these different facial expressions of annoyance when Harold is talking to her, it was such a humane thing to see, knowing that I'll be watching this character go through the toughest maturity of her life and in a new world where morale doesn't exactly exist and it's trying to be expunged, and she still wants to carry everything on and find a new life, and then she does. But also then there's this that I just want to point out. There's been a lot of flack I've heard over the years about Molly Ringwald and her sticking out in some productions because of her fame. And there's also been some criticisms about how she shouldn't be famous. And even Family Guy did a whole gag about it. Well, I don't think people know how to use their Molly Ringwald right, because clearly in The Stand, someone was using their Molly Ringwald right. Even 31 years later, I felt that her performance did not waver as Franny. Like I said, she's not the all-time best female character in the Stephen King character comprehension, but in the 90s, I think she has a little higher stance. And then there's Nick, who is my favorite character, I am not gonna lie. For one reason, I had a crush on him, because who didn't? And you know who you are. Don't lie to yourself. I couldn't. And then there's Nick, who is my favorite character in The Stand for two reasons. One, he's played by Rob Lowe, and I had a major Rob Lowe phase. Like everyone had a Rob Lowe phase. You know who you are. And two, he's a character that is as cautious as he is compassionate, despite being a character that has no ability to speak or to hear, and has his introduction being the snot beat out of him, and then eventually caring for some of the people that attacked him. The way that he exists is probably one of the strongest characters that can do more despite having less. Even his dynamic with Tom is one of my favorite relationships in a Stephen King series, where these are two characters that have not had the best hand at life, and yet they found a way to understand each other. Seeing the way that he interacts with Tom and gives the extra time and stands up for him. There we go again with stands. The way that you can see how he will be placed with everyone else, like it's a no-brainer why he was sought out by Mother Abigail, and she gives him so much credit, like, you did it, you brought everyone together. But then there's this. The way he talks about being an atheist is one of the most underrated things that I've seen in a Stephen King series. Now think about it. Religious stuff is constantly made fun of here, that it has its own category in Stephen King. And that's usually the most overzealous religious characters or the most dangerous religious characters. So the idea of an atheist in a Stephen King series actually has the most honest commentary. He's not belittling about it, he's not argumentative about it, he's just brief in his stance of what he's always known, and he's not attacked for what his stance is. But then Mother Abigail just laughs very kindly and tells him that, you know, there is a God and he does believe in you. The way she says it with the volition, that does make Nick come around without being dismissed for what he just said. He has his own valid reasons. He was born without hearing or speaking, but still is deemed good enough by a Christian woman that has unwavering faith in him and knows that God has faith in him, but doesn't exactly dismiss anything because she said, he believes in you. And that makes Nick kind of change his mind a little bit without being dismissed. He is one of the most underrated characters in Stephen King, in my opinion.
And then there's Larry. Larry.
Can you dig your man, Larry? Larry was a weird character to get into, but after knowing what happens to him at the end, it makes his beginning not as bad, even if you know this guy's gonna go through one hell of a humble. Everyone is not the same person that they once was, and Larry being a character that wasn't exactly gonna be going for a life like this, so when he ends up going through a hell of an evolution to acclimate to a new world and make better choices, and that despite everything that he went through, he still chose good things and came around. Like, his redemption was not supposed to be as powerful as I thought it was going to be. Like, every time I have to go back through his story, it's like, wow, I'm watching a guy who was fighting to be the most egotistical musician in the world and is now doing the most selfless acts and talks entirely different than the way that we were introduced to him. And then, of course, best for last, Mother Abigail. Now, there will be a further discussion on her character in itself, but to give just a breeze through, it could be easy to make Mother Abigail look like a typecast character, especially in something like a Stephen King series, but this is one of the more positive attributes that doesn't make fun of it. He's done so many times to make fun of religion. This one actually feels genuine. But her being brought to life by Ruby Dee, I mean, girl left no crumbs. She knew what she was doing. I've only gotten into like a couple of her films recently, and the depth of her talent is just amazing. And this was my first introduction to her. Oh, and also, I cannot forget the cameos, because this is kind of what The Stand is also known for, is its interestingly bizarre casting choices that has quite the range. So first there was Ed Harris. I know he's more prominent in episode 1, but I'm gonna count him since he pops up literally out of nowhere, and I'm just like, I'm focused because Ed Harris is on here. And then there was Kathy Bates, who has been no stranger to a Stephen King production and has popped up in many of the projects in the 90s. So with this being smack dab from Misery and right before Dolores Claiborne, it's a really cool cameo to pop into. Really shows the connection was more than just being on the big film screen, that the small screen mattered too. And then there's the one that everyone talks about, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. Now, I was too young to know who that was, and I had not seen Airplane yet, so when I got around to watching Airplane, the awkwardness of that cameo makes a lot of sense. They could have put anyone in that role, but someone that had the same kind of fame game as like putting in, Michael Jackson or Taylor Swift, where it's like that sticks out too much with its celebrity nature. And then having to see him dead on the steps in the next episode is so wild. It took me out. Took me out. Oh my god. And I have one last one to mention that's not exactly a cameo, but this is one that I couldn't believe that I had found this out. So there's a random character that exists there called the Rat Man, and I'm sure a lot of people that have seen The Stand like know who I'm talking about, but you're gonna freak out when I tell you that that is the same guy who killed Swayze in Ghost. I've seen both of those multiple times and never put that together. That was a connection I thought I'd never have to make in my life, but here we are. And now you guys know that. It's crazy. Oh, and one last special mention before we go on. The Stand has now gone on to my list of I didn't know Miguel Ferrer was in that. Man has been in too many things, and he has passed on also. So to catch him in things, not knowing he was in it, it's kind of a joy to see, so I gotta mention it. Whenever I've seen people dissect The Stand, I don't see too many people point out like how The Stand was directed. There's been a long history of failed collaborations or weird collaborations with Stephen King that has made it difficult to dissect his work, knowing that it's not just book to movie, but it's book to director to movie. So starting out with Carrie, one of his very first movies that got the big screen treatment from Brian De Palma, it's great. I covered it. It's amazing, but it's a Brian De Palma movie. So it's not going to have most of the Stephen King creativity that he wanted to put in there because it got De Palmified and produced. After Carrie, he did a film called License to Kill. Even some of the shots from Carrie ended up following in other films that Brian De Palma did. And this was just a one-time collaboration, but clearly Brian De Palma got the most out of Carrie than Stephen King did. But then there comes the collaboration that has gone in history as the most frustrating and rejected Stanley Kubrick's interpretation of The Shining. Even though it is the most renowned, atmospherically beautiful, but not the stamp of approval from Stephen King. So somehow Mick Garris got that stamp of approval. After all the different people have interpreted King's visions and not got it to where it has to be, even Stephen King himself had to say in 1986 that only Stephen King can do Stephen King right, and that was Maximum Overdrive, and we all know how that went. But it's where Maximum Overdrive had its little essences of that King directing style with someone else that met the vision. Mick Garris looks to be the closest. The fact that these guys worked together 3 times in the 90s, 2 making a miniseries and 1 named Sleepwalkers that even Stephen King had to take his name off of it because it was just too out there, even for him. There has not been more successful collaborations than him, who somehow got the vision that Stephen King gave a stamp of approval on, otherwise it probably would not have been made. So think about that. So I guess it's that time to talk about Mother Abigail and Randall Flagg being depicted as quote-unquote God and the devil. So this has caused a lot of controversy from what I've heard. Is Mother Abigail supposed to be God and is Randall Flagg supposed to be the devil? But here's the thing. These characters do not call themselves that. Mother Abigail says that she believes in God and that she believes in a cause, but she is not God. Randall Flagg does evil things and convinces the people to do sin, but he's not the devil. Randall Flagg is made to be on the earth and make sure that sin keeps going. Mother Abigail knows that sin cannot keep going and knows that God has told her that she needs to get everyone together, that she believes in him so much that there is not a doubt in her body that something is going to work out, even if she is the one that will not be stopping the undoing, because she knows she can't, because whatever's in God's plan is God's plan. Well, you would think with something like Rapture that it's going to be coming down to God and the devil, but it doesn't, because this is a work of fiction that does something different on the whole concept. This is what makes The Stand one of the many to depict what good and evil is like, and this is one of the few that does something a little bit different. For someone like Stephen King that has made the most terrifying characters that are involved with religion, and it's been said that Mother Abigail kind of feels more like those religious cliches, but seeing the way the whole story works and how she is keeping people together and wanting everyone to still carry on the word, doing what she's probably taught as a little girl, she doesn't really feel cliched. She just feels like a character you can believe in. Just like Randall Flagg is a character that you can believe is out for evil. And that's kind of the whole point of the story. It's a war between good and evil, and the perspective figures that are the driving forces that you would not think would be the driving forces, but here we are. But I also have a few more little examples that I like to make about how this good and evil universe works. Look at Nick. Earlier I mentioned that he said he is an atheist, which means he doesn't believe in God, right? Yet Mother Abigail still sought him out and said, "Come to see me." Still saw the good in him, despite not being a believer, but knew that he was good and that he made the right choice, and he did. But then you have Nadine, who was at a crossroads of indecision. There is a feeling for people, but Randall Flagg just gave an offer she could not refuse and could not see how bad it was in the end. And in the end of it all, she did become a very tragic character for how her decisions literally backfired her in so many ways. But that's what happens in a story like this. You make your path of good or evil, and you have to go through with what happens afterwards. Well, even though we just talked about good and evil, I still want to give evil their own category, because the villains in this, they were just too fun and interesting. You have a very interesting plethora of Stephen King villains in here that range from schlocky, sadistic, layered, and you get all of them in one go, which really makes the series stand out, that you can pick whichever villain you want to go with, or see how someone's choices make them become a villain or lead to their damnation. But starting off with our main guy, Randall Flagg, who is, our quote-unquote devil, but the whole thing about a devil is that they're supposed to make everything sound great and alluring, and he's telling these people if they continue to make bad decisions that are technically not bad anymore, but they'll be so good, and then how that effect comes through. So in the beginning, when Randall Flagg is recruiting more people, goes to the jail cell to get Miguel Ferrer, whose name I can't remember, and I'm so sorry, and does that little hand trick just to show like what he's made of, and it's not that hard for him to have to manipulate people that just needed a little bit of a push, and that's what he was there for. Just that little bit, just to get them going. That didn't have a thought of that, this isn't bad, right? Like Harold and Nadine. I mean, Harold, oh yeah, you knew the moment that he kept rejecting Franny's rejections and pushing and prodding that he was going to be doing something heinous. But Nadine was also very easy to manipulate as well. When she's bunking with Larry and Randall comes to her in her dreams and he seduces her, and that it led to her demise that she didn't want in a million years. And you can see it all over her face, but it's too late. And with Nadine manipulating Harold, and Harold being easy so to manipulate that even a bug could do it, it just spelled disaster for a majority of the people on Team Randall. They didn't have to demise each other because they were their own demise just because they believed in Randall. So there's one last villain that I would call a kind of villain, and that's Julie. There has been such a negative reaction to that actress solely because of the way that she exists in The Stand. Julie is not exactly as manipulative as Nadine or manipulated as Nadine. And oh man, she's definitely a little bit more than Harold, but she exists as like a fork in the road, a really annoying, weak fork in the road. But the way that she exists as the most annoying antagonist that doesn't get the gist. You know that this is a character that's not going to be having a very long lifespan for the way that she's acting. Like at some point, something bad was going to happen, and you were knowing that that was bound to be on the horizons for her. But for the way that she exists in the story, I feel like it kind of counterbalances the different layers and levels of antagonists that exist in the world. Like there's evil in the world, and then there's people who don't mind being evil in the world, and then there's people that are cruel and don't mind that they're cruel. But for the way that she's portrayed, these little annoying mannerisms, it is just played to perfection by Shawnee Smith. Like, my first introduction to her was the Saw movies, and I didn't put it together that this was Julie from The Stand. That girl has some range. She has a definite department of genre, but she's got some range. Anytime someone is annoyed by her, and I'm like, I can see why, because somehow she gave whatever it was into that role and has made it stand out all these years above Nadine and some of the other ones. And like, that's a feat you just have to look at. Where she's introduced in the story to be around Tom and Nick, it just feels like the ultimate ass-handing, that she can be so cruel to others that and judgmental. I mean, clearly, like, even with no one around, she's like, oh, great, so you guys are impaired. Lovely. Like, what? Just keeps growing with the bitchiness. And she's not exactly a major evil, but she is a common threat to compassion. Just, there's no way for her to understand that's not exactly how you treat somebody. And for her to do that to a deaf mute and a man that doesn't think as fast, it makes it all the more satisfying when Nick slaps her in her spiteful little face. It's not even close to the death that she deserved, but that is just as satisfying. So this next part, I'm going to word as carefully as I possibly can because it is a bit of a delicate subject. But it also goes into a topic that could have been controversial, but turned out to not be as controversial for how it's aged. And that's the character of Tom Cullen. So Tom is depicted as a character that is developmentally delayed in some forms of a capacity of never being able to understand beyond like 10 years old, or will always have the mind of a child. It was a tricky time in the 90s when they went into that territory. But over the years, the character of Tom Cullen is not as harsh as the story has made it out to be. So he says he can't spell and he can't read, and those things do happen. People have setbacks to education, even myself included. But the character of Tom has ended up becoming a little bit more relatable for people that don't know how to do those things, or if they have a difficult time with comprehension or understanding anything. It's not a one-size-fits-all when it comes to learning, and some people are very differently, and it can feel very shameful at times. And Tom not being able to know a lot of certain materials did not make him any less of a good person, but this was a criticism he kept giving himself, that he just can't understand things, when you don't really have to be a genius to be a good person. But it is something that we do set to a high standard of having an aptitude of knowledge that can carry you through anything or understand stuff. And if you don't have that, it's hard to function. But when you have a little compassion, it goes a long way. And in The Stand, there has been a lot of compassion to Tom not being able to think as fast as the others. And it's evident with a lot of people that meet him that just understand he just needs a little bit more time. And who better than Nick, who can't speak and can't hear, but is able to communicate with Tom and get him his accommodations that he needs. And that doesn't speak volumes for how you make accommodations, I don't know what does. And this is still in a time that we're still learning on how to educationally and professionally talk about mental disabilities and educational disabilities. We had to start somewhere. In a way, Tom is not exactly a harsh example, but I do feel like he is an example of a character that has a difficult time with education and just needs more time. And that's okay, because everyone goes through it. As someone that grew up with an educational disability and had to find different ways to teach myself, it speaks to me on a level of having a character that said exactly what I was feeling at times. And it wasn't the intention behind this character, but that's the thing. What was supposed to be sort of like a negative aspect to give someone ended up making people analyze this character that wasn't as bad as he himself made it out to be. There's something that can be done if you don't know what to do, if you have good people that show you the way. Everyone did not equivalate IQ over each other, and they extended that same thing to Tom and treated him like anybody else. So with this being a series that's like 6 hours long, you kind of wonder, how was that 6 hours being filled? Because around the beginning of the 4th episode, it's looking like we're wrapping up, but there's still extra time tacked on. When the battle finally is over and good and evil are finally met together and God intervenes with a literal hand of God, whatever that gets us home, it makes you wonder, well, what's going to happen after that? Because that's what we were waiting for. When you have a strong beginning with having the slow burn in the first episode, that's necessary. And then you have the second episode that established the dreams, and then the third where we're starting to get some divisiveness and betrayals. The 4th episode just felt like the end as a concept doesn't exist. There's so much held on the ending of Franny having to go to the hospital, and then Cameo Central with Stephen King coming in, and then Stu kept getting sick, and there were parts that had held on Tom. It was just feeling very stretched out like a rubber band. Even having to go back in the series, knowing that stretch was upon me, I could feel that 6 hours of time. I watched this all the time when I was younger, and I'm just like, oh, this series is great. But then watching it when you're older and digesting everything, you truly do see why people say you want to clear your schedule if you ever want to read or watch The Stand. Oh God, here we go. So I guess it's time to discuss the remake. And I have to be honest again, I didn't even want to finish it. I didn't even get that far. Last I remember, when I gave it a benefit of whatever doubt I had, the opening of Harold jerking the chicken, that was not what I wanted to see. I get that it gives like a darker tone, but I'd have to say it's more like get an attempt, an overdosing on trying too hard to make a dark tone, because the original didn't have to try. It opened up with Don't Fear the Reaper with dead bodies everywhere, which made more of an impact than not knowing what's going on, but we know this kid is feeling especially frustrated in all of the narcissistic ways. Like, no thank you. The thing about Harold is that there were so many underlying issues that you knew you were there without having to have examples about why they were there. It would eventually come out when the series progressed. So Harold's character basically got everything introduced in the first 10 minutes. Yeah, that's how we're going into The Stand. Again, no thank you. After that, I did not even want to wish to see how the other characters were going to fare, if that was the characterization involved, to just scrunch everything and not do this thing called storytelling. After that, I didn't want to see what they were going to be doing with Stu or Franny or my favorite character Nick or Mother Abigail. And I definitely could not see Nadine, even though I knew who was going to be playing her. But after the trial, yeah, there was no way to really go into The Stand without seeing its red flags. even the reviews that I heard about The Stand when it came out was extremely unstellar. Like, if you're gonna go for one of the greatest miniseries that has its own reputation for good reasons, and then you do a disservice like that with a huge cast of people and many good ideas, and they couldn't even execute that, it wasn't worth it. A lot of people said it, and I can see what a lot of people are saying. All right, we're just about wrapped up for The Stand. So for my final little Screen Queen musings on this, since we've already been talking so much about it, I wouldn't say The Stand is the most perfect miniseries from Stephen King, but it is the most cherished miniseries. Look at all the ones that have come out in the 90s, the 2000s, the 2010s. There are so many that have made a way since then. But all roads lead back to The Stand, which is the longest piece of work, but there's so many things to appreciate from it. It also did things that were different than what Stephen King usually did, having some different spins on religious stuff and having a boatload of characters that have followed for generations. And the way that it's interpreted is it's fair better than most things. Sure, there are some schlocky moments, but that's kind of what we're here for. There's an embracement for different types of media and how they are going to be presented. And like I said, Stephen King has had different presentations over time, so this is one of the many, but one of the few that he actually really enjoys and got to put a big stamp in there. And it's such an unforgettable series that is a long journey, but it's a journey that's worth it. All right, so this was a lot to cover in 1 week, and I'm very proud of myself, but now is the time to find out what the next episode is going to be on the Halloween series. Let me get my little suggestion jar and mix it up real good for my little Vanna White moment. That one fell back in. Let's see what we got here. Oh, Lord. What range are we going to go to? Because this is just the start of what could go. Ah! I knew it. Okay. Well, speaking of divisive, we have another one that we're covering. So, for the next episode on The Screen Queen is going to be It, the remake. Yeah, we're going there. And for added bonus, we're covering both of them because I feel like both of them have to go together with the way things are. So that'll be a fun treat. Oh, Lord, here we go. Alrighty. So, thank you so much for staying tuned for the show and stopping by to listen to this episode. If you want to catch up with me in between uploads, you can find me on my Instagram at the Queen of the Screen, where I have a whole bunch of new reels I've been putting up. I've been getting up on my reel game. It's real cool. And if you're looking for an easier way to listen to your media queen, I am also available on YouTube, where you can find the entire Screen Queen catalog there. Just look up the Screen Queen and you'll find my glitchy glasses. And lastly, I like to advertise my book series Inglorious Inc. that also has a hefty handful of Stephen King references in there. So if you're into anything that has to do with scrappy characters, chaos, and absolutely illegal things that are being taken care of in the most terrifyingly illegal ways, then please check out my chaotic little group of tattoo artists in Inglorious Inc. All right, guys, that's a wrap for me. This is your Screen Queen, signing off. Bye-bye!